Good afternoon. Welcome to the EFI Foundation event for releasing our new fact book for H2 Hub stakeholders titled Building Stronger Community Engagement in Hydrogen Hubs. My name is Alicia Moulton, and I'm the Deputy Director of Communications. The EFI Foundation continues the work of the Energy Futures Initiative to advance technically grounded solutions for the clean energy transition through evidence-based analysis, thought leadership, and coalition building. We published our new fact book today, and it is available on our website at efifoundation.org. Before we continue, two quick announcements. First, this event is being recorded and will be available afterward on our YouTube channel. Second, toward the end of the hour, we will have a short audience Q&A. If you have a question, submit it through Zoom's chat feature at any time during the event. We will read off questions during the Q&A portion, and we'll get to as many as possible. And now to kick things off, I give the floor to EFI Foundation CEO and 13th Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz.
Okay, well, thank you, Alicia, and thanks to all of you who have tuned in, and also thank you very much to Breakthrough Energy, who has been the sponsor for this work. So today we'll present our fact book on hydrogen communities. A resource to support ongoing efforts to align stakeholders in hydrogen hub development. With an $8 billion investment, the Hydrogen Hubs program at DOE can certainly drive a national clean hydrogen network, support the emissions reductions of hard to decarbonize sectors like heavy industry. We've produced about half a dozen reports since 2021 on clean hydrogen, but this is the first time that one of our reports is focusing specifically on community engagement. And we're very excited about this important new research direction. Hydrogen certainly is a very, very strong candidate to be an essential part of deploying clean energy. But it's very important to ensure that the hubs have strong community engagement, both established groups and individuals, and including them through things like community benefits plan negotiations, CBPs. DOE requires these as part of hub applications. The Hydrogen Hubs CBP process provides really the opportunity to redefine collaboration in clean energy development. The communities of focus in DOE's guidance are those facing disproportionate impact by industry operations, disadvantaged communities, tribal, labor, and environmental justice communities. The EFI Foundation's fact book that you will be hearing more about today highlights the perspectives of these individuals and groups. It reflects their preferred modes of engagement, their attitudes towards hydrogen hubs, and perceptions of DOE's community engagement processes. The work is a culmination of several months of work, including a large national survey, a literature review, desktop research on binding agreements in analogous sectors, and interviews with DOE, hydrogen hub developers, and other nonprofits. It's part of a broader effort to drive productive conversation through sharing information and convening shareholders. As the EFI Foundation's knowledge in this space continues to evolve, this fact book aims to bring new voices into the conversation around accomplishing effective community engagement. Together, we can leverage this moment to create an equitable transition that tackles climate change while supporting the priorities of disadvantaged tribal, labor, and EJ communities. So thanks to the team at EFI who organized this event, created this resource for DOE, hub developers, and community members and groups. I also want to thank very much our internal and external reviewers who offered invaluable perspectives and helped shape this fact book into what we hope certainly will be a very useful resource for us and for many others. So I'm going to introduce now Dr. Madeline Schomburg to present the findings from our fact book. Madeline's research focuses on energy justice examining access and inclusion in policy processes and decision-making. She's the research director at the EFI Foundation. She led this project, and she joined us in 2022, a couple of years ago, from Colorado State University. So Madeline, take it away.
Thank you very much, Secretary Moniz. Allow me to please pull up my slides. Okay. Great. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. I am thrilled to be here with you to reveal the results of this research, which, as Secretary Moniz indicated, is the culmination of a year of study with the goal of really helping to further the community engagement processes in the Hydrogen Hub program. We at the EFI Foundation believe strongly that the success of this program depends on coalition building with communities, which is why we are seeking to help align the Department of Energy, the hub developers, and the community groups themselves in how they are thinking about and approaching community engagement. To that end, we have drawn on pre-existing literature in community engagement processes, as well as adding our own data collection through a series of interviews, a large national survey, and some case study analyses. Now, before I get into the meat of things, I would like to just note up front that the hydrogen space and the community engagement space are both constantly evolving. So some of what we learned a year ago when we began this study has changed, and our findings and recommendations have changed accordingly. And some of what I present to you today may change in the coming months. And so I invite you and I encourage you to please reach out to us with comments, thoughts, conversations, so that we can continue to learn and grow with you in this process. Now, most of what I'm going to share with you today comes from the survey that we did, which was distributed to a random assortment of people living in states with Hydrogen Hub applications, which it turned out was almost every state in the country. And you'll see that we had pretty good representation in our survey responses across the country geographically, with the notable exception of South Dakota there, who we will have to target more deliberately next time, but otherwise really good representation. And in order to qualify to fill out the survey, respondents had to self-identify as a member of one of 4 community types, as defined by the Hydrogen Hub program. Either a tribal group, a labor or other workforce group, an environmental justice group, or a member of a disadvantaged community as defined through the CGIST map. And with 5,000 survey responses across the nation, we ended up with a large enough sample that we could do really robust analyses across community types, across geographies, and across other demographics of interest. Now, I'm only sharing a few of our key takeaways today in the interest of time, but please see the fact book after this for more information. And I'm going to start with one of our big findings right off the bat, which admittedly was a little bit surprising to us, just the degree of support that we saw from our respondents for hydrogen, generally speaking. And then when we drilled down further to some of the potential benefits and risks, again, we saw a really high degree of agreement that the benefits or potential benefits were likely to be true, such as the creation of new jobs and hydrogen's ability to address climate change. And we saw a lot more disagreement about some of the potential risks. You'll note, for instance, if you look at the eliminate old jobs or prolonging our dependence on fossil fuels, that those were pretty split in people who agreed and disagreed that hydrogen could create those issues. I'd also like to point out that only 3% of our respondents actually said that they opposed hydrogen writ large. And when we asked those folks what they would need in order to change their position on hydrogen, we got a variety of responses, but the 2 that really rose to the top by and large were a need for more information and a need for more environmental protections. The environment or the need for more information component, some folks had a sort of generic call for more information, and others asked for more specific information about safety, about the technology, or about its economic viability. Next, we asked people about how they felt about the community engagement practices and methods that were being utilized, particularly as it related to the community benefits plan guidance that was put out by the Department of Energy. So when we think about community engagement, we are thinking about it as a series of activities that fall along a spectrum, all the way from what you see on the left-hand side, which is categorized as informing or consulting, but really constitutes more of a one-way, one-time information sharing, all the way up to something that's more akin to collaboration or even deferring to communities, which has a high degree of community involvement in a sustained two-way dialogue. So we developed a long list of methods that span the spectrum, both from that literature review as well as from what was in the CBP, or Community Benefits Plan guidance document. And then we asked respondents how they felt about those various methods and which ones they preferred. And what we saw was that people overwhelmingly preferred citizen panels and public hearings. And after that, you can see that, especially the next 5 or 6, it seems almost like a toss-up in terms of which ones people actually prefer. But those two really stood out to us. And the other thing we noticed when we looked at this top 10 list was that the majority of these mechanisms in the top 10 fall on the right-hand side of that spectrum we just looked at. So they tend to be more about involvement and collaboration and less about the informing and consulting. Now, by the time we had collected all of our data, the hub selections had been announced. So we were able to drill down a little bit more into the specific hub regions to explore whether there were any variations of note. And you can tell just by looking at the graph that what we saw was actually a pretty high degree of consistency across the regions in terms of preferring citizen panels and public hearings. A little bit, of course, a variation of which one is dominant, but nonetheless, those two still continue to stand out. And it is worth noting that as of today, all 7 hubs have publicly committed to using citizen panels as part of their engagement processes, but only a couple have made any kind of public announcement about public hearings. Next, we asked people how they felt about the CBP more specifically. So we wanted to know if a hub developer followed the community benefits plan guidance in both the steps and the methods that were recommended in there, would it lead to benefits for their community? And what we found was that respondents felt that the answer was generally yes, if they were more familiar already with community benefits plans and hydrogen. So put another way, for respondents who already knew something about community benefits plans, already felt familiar with engagement processes, and respondents who already felt familiar with hydrogen, they felt that if developers followed that CBP guidance, it was likely to result in more participation for their community, more benefits for their community, more influence over the decision, and a more fair process. We also found that the majority of respondents felt that using a binding agreement increased their support for a hydrogen hub project. And that was also tied to that familiarity with the community benefits plan process. So for folks who already had some familiarity with CBPs and with engagement processes, they were even more likely to say that using a binding agreement increased their support for the project. So what you could take from those two pieces is that it seems there's a really important component of a baseline knowledge or familiarity with community benefits plans and community engagement and hydrogen that's critical moving into the rest of the engagement processes for whether or not people feel that that engagement will be effective. Given that binding agreements seemed like an important component of winning support for projects, we looked at what the hubs have committed to for binding agreements. And as of February of 2024, we found that 5 of the 7 hubs have publicly announced plans to utilize binding agreements in their engagement processes. There is a slight preference among those for project labor agreements, but 4 of the 5 have indicated they will also use some form of community agreement, whether it's a community benefits plan or some other type is not necessarily clear in each case. And overall, we still don't know yet, of course, how those will be implemented, which is one of the things we are going to tease out in the next phase of our project, which I will preview for you in a moment. So 3 recommendations I want to highlight based on what I've just shared with you. One is that we think hub developers should commit to extra environmental protections and remediation through binding agreements, and should help ensure that all community members' questions are answered. Who should answer those questions is another question that we are seeking to address with our next phase of the research. Second, the Department of Energy should update the CBP or Community Benefits Plan guidance document to include some of the methods that may not have been included the first time around, and should also prioritize funding projects that utilize those most preferred engagement methods, like citizen panels and public hearings. And third, that developers should create binding agreements with each community type that is found in their project area. So for instance, a developer may want to form a community workforce agreement with labor representatives and a community benefits agreement with environmental justice representatives and others as warranted. I'll note that, again, this is just a snapshot of what we have. There is more in the fact book, but I would like to preview for you briefly what we are working on now as it relates to what we found in the first part of our study. So we are doing a second survey. This one is digging into more of the information question and trying to tease out whether it's the information that is provided or the person or entity that is providing it that matters most in shaping how people feel about hydrogen. So the results of this survey should help us address that piece I mentioned that seems to be really critical about the baseline knowledge and familiarity with hydrogen and with community benefits plans and engagement processes. The other piece we are doing is a deeper dive on the case study analyses. We have chosen 5 cases, all of which resulted in an actual binding agreement, specifically a community benefits agreement or a good neighbor agreement. And they span a range of geographies across the country and a range of analogous sectors. Some have been in place for decades and some are relatively new. But the goal of this piece is to help understand how did they get from nothing to a binding agreement? Who was involved in those conversations? How were they involved? When were they involved? What was the nature of the conversations? All of which should help us inform that piece about the hubs developing binding agreements, which, as we just saw, several of them have now committed to. And the overarching takeaway that I think I would like to leave you with today in thinking about this work is that even though communities are unique and should be treated as such, what we found in our data again and again was a relatively high degree of consistency in how communities want to be approached, how they want to be brought into these processes. And so that suggests, at least to me, that there is an opportunity here to create a set of best practices and recommendations that can be utilized to give us all a common starting point, with the acknowledgement that that will need to change and evolve with each situation that we are in. And with that, I would like to thank our project team. We were led by Alex Kaiser, our resident hydrogen expert and COO, and supported by our team with a fabulous senior research associate, Nick Britton, and research fellow, Beth Dowdy, and again, funded by Breakthrough Energy. So thank you very much for that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and introduce our panel. So if our panelists could perhaps turn their cameras on and introduce you. Thank you. So let's see, starting from the left of my screen, we have Jeanette Pablo joining us, who is the Director of Climate Equity at the Clean Air Task Force. We have Susie Baker, who is the Stakeholder Engagement Specialist at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations for the Department of Energy. We have Dr. Rudra Kapila, who is the Deputy Director of Carbon Management and Hydrogen at Third Way. And we are moderated by Ani Kame Inu Anvi, the Director of Strategic Initiatives, U.S. Policy and Advocacy for Breakthrough Energy. Thank you all for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Madeline. Thanks a lot for hosting this fantastic webinar and for all the work that you and the team have done on the fact book. It's been a real privilege from Breakthrough Energy's perspective to be a part of this process, and I'm really excited to take some time now with our expert panel to talk about the impact of the fact book and some of the next steps that we hope to utilize in this process. We're going to start, as we mentioned at the top, with a handful of questions that I'll moderate for the panel, and then we hope to open it up to the audience for some of the questions that you all have been putting in the chat. So thank you for those. So I want to just get started with some of the basics. And so I want to turn to you, Susie, at Department of Energy. If you could just remind us, basically, where are we in the hydrogen hubs process? It's a multi-phased process happening over several months and years, essentially. Can you just give us a little glimpse into where we are right now in that process?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think as a reminder, the key thing to remember is that we're still extremely early in the process of developing these hubs. President Biden announced our 7 sections back in October, and we've been hard at work negotiating just the planning phase, the very first project phase since then. Once this initial negotiations complete, each hub will have approximately 12 to 18 months and up to $20 million just to firm up their plans and complete preliminary design work. And this is where we expect them to start to really execute on some of the engagement plans that were a part of their application. So that will shape the projects in an ongoing fashion. From there, there's going to be additional funding phases, of course. So in the second phase, we'll see a bump of financial support to help folks get through NEPA, which will include, of course, formal public meetings, as well as the permitting process. And if folks can get through all of that, then in phase 3, they'll enter into construction. So that's sort of the largest tranche of federal support. And in phase 4, operations. So we're looking at like an 8 to 10 year timeline and really truly a couple of years, maybe 3 years before we even have steel on the ground. So all that to say, you should expect a couple of years, 3 years of very active engagement and responsiveness from the hubs as well as OSED before these projects actually begin.
Great. So what I hear you saying is it's a long process. And in addition to that, it's very new, right? The department has never done anything like this. It is a first for everyone, both hub developers, the agencies, staff working on both sides. Can you, now that you've seen the fact book, you've seen the responses from community members, how do you think this fact book really helps your team move the hubs process forward, recognizing that very long time horizon? What does this fact book and the information provided really help you do to move all of these phases through?
Yeah, well, we love this report because we love new data. And as far as I know, this is the very first survey of its kind that actually has used the same sort of categories that we're currently using in the federal government to define different groups and to track what their needs are and integrate that into our work. So I think, you know, that piece is super valuable that now we have a baseline. And then there are a number of things that were just really exciting to learn. Like, I think we all feel like there are good vibes with hydrogen. People are excited about it. But to see those overwhelming supportive numbers was like, oh yeah, we really need to get this right and to continue to foster that trust. And it's really amazing not to be sort of like starting from a deficit. I think the citizen panels, for instance, that was a really cool finding for me because that's not something that we had been specifically advocating for. And now we understand the value of that. And, you know, I think it's potentially a nice complement to some of the other approaches that folks are taking. And just sort of as a preview, we are currently working on a partnering approach that will allow EFI and other organizations who are doing this type of research to bring these findings directly to the hubs. So, you know, of course, we're going to send them a link, but we're also going to make sure that they hear directly from the researchers and that this information is making it to them in a timely fashion so they can incorporate it in real time into their approach.
Yeah, I think that's going to be remarkable because it's trying to figure out how you guys play the role of like big picture moderator, but also ensuring that each one of the hubs and the communities is getting the information that they need. Rudra, I want to turn to you. Your team has done a lot of field work, or is beginning the process of doing a lot of field work with different hub communities. Recognizing some of your experience in this space and your team's experience, what's the most surprising component out of the survey results in your opinion?
Oh, and thank you again. I'm delighted to be part of this esteemed panel. This is a fantastic fact book, primarily for the reason that it doesn't treat communities as one solid block. It really has aimed to break it down between, let's say, tribal groups, disadvantaged communities, or as I prefer to use, traditionally underserved communities, as well as those in the more kind of EJ activism space. So not only breaking it down in terms of the various types of participants and actors within a community, also the breakdown per region is also very, very helpful. Because there are going to be some communities that are very welcoming and those that are going to be slightly skeptical. And I think one of people in this sector may find quite surprising is the very large number of people and respondents who would be very willing to engage and would consider the process a lot fairer, as the aforementioned citizen panels, public hearings, open houses, these kind of aspects of community engagement are implemented, I think, and not only in terms of, you know, being 80% and above of support, that, you know, people are willing to engage. And I think particularly developers and folks in industry should take heart in that, because in the past, you know, quite often the first time they engage with some of the community leaders is at the litigation stage, and by then it's too late. But clearly, you know, DOE have made, you know, tremendous strides in not only having these community benefit plans as a mandatory component, but also it's showing, at least I feel, that, you know, there are good faith actors who are coming with, you know, who are demonstrating intentionality in forming these community benefit plans.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think creating directionality for those good intentions is one of the most important components right now, right? Helping support and maintain the positive first impressions. That's one of the most surprising things to me as well, is that in such a robust survey that you got such remarkable and strong first impressions from a diversity of community members. So Jeanette, I want to turn to you, recognizing what our colleagues have offered, you know, the surprising pieces, the next phases. Why do you think this fact book is so important? Why is this unique in this space? And what does it bring to the conversation that has previously been missing? We're in a new technology. We're in, as we mentioned with Susie, we're in some firsts. What does this bring to the space from your perspective? And we'll want to hear you in your
right. No lip reading, right? So anyway, thank you, Madeline and Secretary Moniz and Ani, for inviting me to join the panel. It's really an exciting project that you all have been working on. And I'd really like to just start by commending the EFI Foundation's work in this space. It's still extremely rare and absolutely critical. So so the role of communities, you know, in our own thinking, is that it's pivotal to our ability to actually deploy technologies that can reduce the greenhouse gases. And that this decade, you know, I know we're in 2024, but I'm counting 2020 to 2029, is really pivotal for laying the policy and technology foundation for achieving our climate goals. I mean, like Susie said, the next 3 years and 5 years are going to be really pivotal, even though steel won't be going into the ground for 3 years. So at the same time, I think it's really fair to say that there's an understanding and trust gap between climate and community stakeholders. They're very different cultures, and this is actually what our own research is finding is really a huge barrier. And so I was particularly impressed that the survey was so positive about hydrogen and its opportunities. But it's also especially important because understanding community perspectives, which is actually revealed in a lot of the content of the survey, and their needs, is really a first step for building relationships based on trust, information, and collaboration, as everybody noted, with the continuum of engagement. And frankly, I think that the data and the key insights in the fact book are a major contribution toward knowledge sharing between these two clusters of stakeholders. You know, bridging the difference between what you might call, and I worked for companies for a number of years, sort of the corporate culture is very different from like the local community culture. And then just lastly, you know, we're really talking about developing long-term relationships. The steel is going to be in the ground for a long time, and it's not moving. So, and productive negotiations are really essential. Neither of these can be achieved without the understanding and the trust. And I feel like the fact book presents a lot of data that will help both sides have a greater chance of coming together. So, next question.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeanette. I think what you're highlighting is the importance of that authenticity around engagement. And Susie, I want to turn back to you because that's one of the challenges that the department will face, certainly working with the hubs in terms of how to initiate and then maintain the authenticity of that engagement. One of the recommendations from the fact book is that the Department of Energy should update the community benefits planning guidance to include things like citizen panels. We heard from Madeline that that was one of the top responses. Is that possible? And what's the mechanism by which like the agency might be able to create some of those requirements in this phase? You mentioned how early we are. What sort of tools do you have to create those requirements within the community benefits planning requirements?
Yeah, so we absolutely are looking at opportunities for community voices to be heard throughout the life of the project, through things like advisory boards, engagement councils. So this recommendation is really consistent with a lot of the conversations that we're having with the hubs in negotiation right now. Those are, of course, really sensitive, so I can't share a ton of detail. It's too early to even say exactly what this is going to look like for each hub. But I do think it's fair to say that we'll have mechanisms for accountability and connectivity with every single impacted community. And that's really the goal. I wouldn't be surprised if many of the hubs pick up these recommendations, even without, you know, it being mandated. And so we absolutely, you know, as OSED are going to be on the ground engaging with folks through listening sessions and public meetings and other types of engagements. I'm super open to the idea of adding, you know, additional modes of engagement over time. And I love the way that the citizen panels sort of leverage survey techniques. So you're getting almost like a reality check, right? Because often you get overrepresentation of interested stakeholders and less representation for folks who aren't as involved. And so I feel like they're a really nice tool for addressing that disparity. But yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that these hubs are public-private partnerships. So we want local communities to be empowered to reach out both to OSED and to the hubs teams, and that both of us, you know, as project partners, we're gonna respond. We're gonna be available to you, and we want your input.
Great, thanks. It's good to know that there will be multiple, you know, there are iterations by which we can encourage and retain some of that authenticity. Rudra, to that point, you mentioned how much you appreciated the specific sectors within the survey that were identified. And again, as Madeline noted in her opening, those definitions are utilized as consistent with the Department of Energy and with OSED's definitions at this point. Recognizing we have a lot of stakeholders engaged here and we might characterize communities differently. For consistency's sake, the fact book has used those. But I want to focus on a few specifics and ask you, why do you think that the disadvantaged communities sector were the least familiar with hydrogen compared to other community sectors surveyed, like tribal or EJ? Why do you think that might be?
So the as the DOE defines it, DAC, disadvantaged communities, which is frankly now an outdated term. In the community engagement space, we refer to it as underserved communities or traditionally underserved. And the clue is in the name, underserved. These communities are low income, but they also lack some of the very basic amenities that, let's say, I mean, I think the majority of us on this panel are in the Washington, D.C. area. You know, even things as basic as good roads, connectivity, a grocery store. I'm not surprised that, you know, in addition to requiring more information about what is even hydrogen, that environmental protection is very important, because in underserved communities, a large portion rely on the local land and water for sustenance. These communities are traditionally underserved, also in terms of tax dollars coming to their communities for their schools. I mentioned roads, but even public transport. And so, you know, naturally, and the results in this fact book show and indicate, as soon as you mention jobs, and not just jobs, the key here is good quality jobs, because disadvantaged communities or underserved communities are also looking for personal security and personal stability. These have to be good quality jobs where you can get a decent pay without, let's say, a college degree. And they are stable. They can provide healthcare. Again, DACs, disadvantaged communities, or the traditionally underserved, also very critically lack access to healthcare. So when you have some of these very basic needs that still need to be fulfilled, they hold prominence. But naturally, as the fact book has demonstrated, when you are intentional and genuinely acting in good faith to engage, because community engagement, that term itself, has become a buzzword. So when you are showing that you are genuinely engaged, then, you know, that is when these communities are going to be more amenable to such projects.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more. And that consistency is so clear over such a long process. Being consistent with the specifics of each community's need is going to be really critical. Jeanette, coming back to you, in our earlier conversations, both what you've shared today, but in our earlier conversations about this work, you have referenced that we're in an era of transition. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean? What are we transitioning to or from here? We still can't lip read, though I'm working on it.
I'm sorry. So I just want to, before we go into that, I just want to say, Rudra, I 100% agree with everything you said. You know, my focus is environmental justice communities, and what you said just resonates completely. It's a completely different environment than many of us are accustomed to, and the barriers are such a huge burden, and the opportunities not so much. And even in terms of jobs, you know, one of the communities that I've been working with, the young people can't get to the community college for training for jobs, you know, in their area, because it's a rural area and there's no public transportation. So anyway, that's not the question I'm supposed to be answering though. Basically, flexibility and optionality are hugely important attributes for long-term engagement and relationships between hubs or any other kind of clean energy project and local communities. And I've already mentioned like the pivotal decade, but it's really one of enormous transition, probably between now and mid-century. This decade is probably the most determinative and pivotal in terms of laying the foundation and developing the relationships and incorporating the acceleration of a technology advancement as well as the impacts on these communities. I mean, the status of a lot of the technologies we're talking about today are going to be, perhaps somewhat different in 5 years even. And the impacts on the communities, they can range from job and economic issues, positive and negative, as well as environmental protections. And so, when you think about the clean energy technology kind of ecosystem, it's federal and state government policies, traditional companies, startup companies, which are actually quite different, think tanks and nonprofits. These are all extremely diverse. So we have a lot of players, on the field, so to speak. And to be successful, we're just going to have to continually incorporate all these new learnings in community engagement, in understanding perspectives, in the technologies and the policies that will, as Susie indicated, what you might say, a continual improvement in terms of community engagement and community benefits plans in the department's regulations and et cetera. So a static approach is the enemy, like maybe even the biggest enemy, because I think all of these progressions and improvements and shared learning is our best chance to create the trust, to have the clarity of information. I mean, hydrogen it's a little bit of a generic word, right? There's maybe some people might say good hydrogen and bad hydrogen and medium hydrogen, and the communities are, they're going to really want to know the specifics of, is it blue? Is it green? Is the pipeline going under where they fish in the river? And what do they know about that potential impact? So that kind of data is going to be critical, not just to come from a trusted source, right? But also that it's presented in a believable and clear way. And so it's a, we're all sitting on these rockets and they're going forward, and there's just so much going on. And I think that, again, you just can't sit and say, this is where we're going to start. This is our community benefits agreement. It's just not going to be, I'm all for community benefits agreements, but they can't be static either. There has to be some kind of flexibility as, again, the communities develop their own, achieve from the benefits and go forward. So, and then one last comment, I really love the first recommendation that Madeline mentioned, which is developers need to commit to extra environmental protections and remediation, because one of the biggest challenges I see with all this change is that, as a climate policy person, we're looking ahead. We're looking to the future. We're looking to fix it, really. But many of these environmental justice communities are living with the past, and particularly air and water quality issues. And how to merge those is really the community benefits are a real opportunity, and some of the additional research in terms of co-benefits for technologies. But I just want to commend Madeline for putting that one at the top. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette. I think something we often say in our community engagement work with partners and grantees is history is perhaps one of the most important stakeholders that we need to account for right now. And there are a lot of questions in our chat about What does that look like, right? How are we transitioning? Something Secretary Moniz said at the top is that a lot of the work that EFI is focused on is on clean hydrogen, right? As we move through this era of clean energy transition, it is a transition. We are not going to be perfect from the start. And the hydrogen hubs are a great example of that transition and trying to make our way as the technologies evolve and the people and our communities evolve to do that together toward a cleaner economy. So we have gotten a lot of amazing questions, and folks should continue to put those in the chat. But I'm going to pivot now to try and address a number of the questions that people have asked. Thank you so much. And I want to say thank you to Beth, who Madeline mentioned at the top, who's been an important part of this research team for helping to filter a lot of those questions. We are not going to get to all of them. So thank you for them, and thanks for your patience as we work through as many as we can. So to get started, Madeline, I want to come back to you. There have been a lot of questions about what is a citizen panel? What does that look like? How is it defined? So can you provide a little bit more information about this specific recommendation? Can you speak more to like, what do they look like? What types of community members and stakeholders are involved? What are the dynamics there?
Yeah, so the way that we defined it in our survey was a group of people who are representative of the community in which you are operating, who are chosen to provide input on the project throughout the life of the project. So it is meant to be representative demographically of a community, and therefore it would vary a lot from place to place to place. And it is not necessarily meant to be composed of experts, and I put that in quotes deliberately, acknowledging that community members are experts on lots of things, but not meant to be necessarily experts on hydrogen or experts on whatever the topic is at hand. And that's the goal of what we have called a citizen panel. They do masquerade under other names in other places. So you might see a different term like a community advisory board, which often is defined the same way. So you have to kind of pay attention to how things are being defined when you're talking about these various methods and tools.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. Susie, I want to come back to you. You shared a handful of what the next steps are, DOE's resources, opportunities for engagement. For people who, we have 150 people, tuned in here. If people want to be engaged with the hubs, learn more, where do they start?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to stay in touch with us and with the hubs is to sign up for the OSET newsletter, because we will always blast out engagement opportunities and you'll be in the know instantly. So it'll be posted on our website and we'll do social media outreach, but that's just a really good way to ensure that you don't miss any updates. I think if you are concerned about a specific issue around a hub, or you are a representative of a group, in proximity to a hub, you can also reach out to me and my team directly. So we have inboxes for each hub, and I'm happy to share my contact information here, but we do lots and lots of meetings and listening sessions, and that information is carefully documented and fed back to our project management teams on an ongoing basis. So just to know that you're not sort of screaming into a void, like that information is treated very carefully and very respectfully. So yeah, reach out to us. I'm happy to provide all of this to Madeline and her team, and it can come to you in the follow-up email. But yeah, we want to hear from you. We want to learn from you. Particularly if you are part of one of the impacted communities of the hubs.
Great, thank you, Susie. We'll make sure to include that in the follow-up information. Rudra, you spoke a lot to the different sectors of the community, the authenticity of engagement. What do you think is like one of the most important first steps for community leaders, leaders in the energy space, to demonstrate that they want to be genuinely engaged in communities? There's lots of questions and comments around sort of that authenticity of engagement, dialogue. What does that look like? How do we not repeat some of the mistakes historically made in the energy development system?
Well, I think understanding foremost that you are entering areas which are currently still dealing with legacy issues is very important. you know, in terms of the difference, let's say, between the various communities, just to highlight regarding disadvantaged communities or the underserved community, it's important to understand that, you know, you have to acknowledge the lived experiences of the people living in these communities. And their lived experiences have often been overlooked, or they've been ignored. And that ignorance or lack of attention serves as a foundation for their perceptions, including those around emerging sectors such as new upcoming technologies, not just hydrogen, but also, let's say, direct air capture, and even renewable projects. There is this level of mistrust that you have to overcome. And I think accepting that they have, and accepting and acknowledging their lived experiences is number one. But also, I think understanding that community benefit plans, yes, they are new and many in industry have never done this before. But I think one way to look at them is to consider them as prosperity planning. You are investing and planning into the prosperity of this community. So what does that mean? That means, you know, go beyond just tax benefits. You have to think long term. How are the tax breaks going to feed back into the community? You should also live in the actual community rather than just kind of helicopter in when needed. And it's just going slightly, and I think these comments are also aimed at Susie, you know, for the next phase as you're getting into as time goes on and we are building out more and more hubs, and as the hubs themselves also build out larger and become like regional ecosystems, you know, communities often don't know what to even ask for. So kind of, you know, with that guidance as we go along, just keep in mind that this is planning for their prosperity and how to lift them up.
I love that prosperity planning. I need to incorporate it just in my own personal narrative too. That's such a beautiful way of capturing the journey that this is representing. Jeanette, you mentioned that this facts book is like a really important way, and it's very consistent with what Rudra was saying. It's an opportunity to start building trust. How do we determine like who the trusted people are, or who they should be, right? Madeline mentioned kind of like who can be on a citizen panel, which is many different people within a community. How do we determine who's trustworthy? How do we use that as a metric?
Well, I don't think that's a really good metric, actually, because who are we to say who's trusted by the community? Or, you know, I mean, I think that, you know, sometimes when we're trying to explore these new areas, we, you know, we choose things that make it more difficult. I mean, you can go into a community and after a certain amount of time, you can sort of have a perception as to who are the people in the community that are trusted by the community. And working with those people, you know, who should be to a certain extent self-selected, right? Again, who are we to choose, right? And then, you know, I think actually how we start our approach to the relationship, it's not fatal if you do it wrong, but you can really give yourself a leg up if you do a few things right. And I hope, I don't want to be too revolutionary, but please don't bring a PowerPoint to your first meeting. Okay. You know, it's not the best foot forward. And not that there isn't a huge important, you know, aspect to information sharing and those things, but like when we go into a community, first we try to find an ambassador. And there are different kinds of ambassadors. There's ambassadors, somebody who would, you know, you would know, and then the community is, you know, highly respects that person. There's other ways you would have a reputation for your company or your organization to precede you. And frankly, our first step is we have dinner together. You know, I mean, I know that's unconventional, but there's enormous amounts of information that you can get in a group dinner. Let the community pick who, you know, who they want to bring. And just those conversations, you will start to get a feel. And frankly, I think that's a it's a highly positive experience, and you will get information that you would never have gotten before. When you start out with a very formal approach, which is very corporate, I used to do that all the time myself, but this is different, and trust builds. Like, we will have conversations with, like, well, we don't agree with you, Jeanette. I'm like, that's okay. Why don't we keep talking about it? And I'd like to learn more about your concerns, because many of these concerns that some of us might say, why is that a concern? When as Rudra said, when you have a better understanding of their lived experience, you realize they're completely rational. They have good reasons for their concerns. And so that's why, again, the trust, the long-term relationship, and the consistency of being there, as you also mentioned, being in the community is really important.
Yeah, there's always much to be said about sharing a meal together, whether it's in your own house or in a community project. So appreciate that, the simplicity of that takeaway, but we also recognize how complicated it is at the community level. We just have a few minutes left, and I really want to get people out of here on time. So an open question here. If you had to, for our panelists, sort of like take one central component away from the fact book, what do you think is the most important thing that communities, developers, OSED, and the agency, how should they engage with this research? What's the central takeaway in terms of how to engage with this research? And if a couple of you want to jump in for a quick bite-sized takeaway, Madeline, I'll let you close us out after folks have a quick opportunity.
I can go first. Oh, sorry, or Jeanette, if you'd like to. Just two things that really stood out to me, some key themes, is having a formalized listening process and creating space to be heard. These are very, key elements of some of the preferred engagement methods that the fact book highlights. And certainly for those of us who are going to be working in the field, or who have worked in the field in the past and want to kind of, bring in new methods, certainly this fact book is very helpful to also outline the language needed so that those of us who do work in the field can be good translators both to industry and government, as well as to community members.
Perfect. Thanks, Rudra. Jeanette, do you have a quick takeaway?
Yeah, just going back to something Madeline said, the stages of community involvement and the survey engagement methods, it's just a very practical approach, manageable. It's a pathway to how to do involvement and how to do engagement. It's not like some big black ball that's you can't even penetrate it. So I like the practicality of it, frankly.
Awesome. Susie, I'll give you the last word before we turn it over to Madeline to close us out.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit redundant to what I've already said, but just I love that we have this baseline. I think it's so valuable. I'm so grateful to EFI for doing this work. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation today. I think it really level sets for everybody in the whole ecosystem working on this. Like, oh, this is really where we are. And having worked on carbon capture and nuclear and other technologies previously, we have a real strategic advantage here. People want this technology. They really like it. So of all the tricky climate tech, this one, really has a chance to flourish. And so anyhow, very excited that we have that support in place and to continue to grow that over time.
Thank you all so much for your thoughts and feedback. And I will close out actually in the spirit of transparency, very quickly addressing one of the comments that came in, casting a little bit of doubt about what we're doing and the goal of what we're trying to achieve here. And I want to just state that we are operating in a world in which hydrogen is happening, and there's an opportunity because of its novelty to do something different and to do it in a way that hasn't been done before. And that's what we're seeking to capitalize on here. We're trying to leverage this moment to come up with better, new ways to do community engagement, recognizing that we're not going to get it all right all the time in every situation. And so I do really appreciate all of you who have asked the hard questions and pointed the fingers. Please continue to do that, because it it drives conversations in productive ways. So thank you very much, Secretary Moniz. I saw you unmuted. I don't know if you wanted to say something, and I apologize if I stepped on your time.
No, I'll just say a couple of words. First of all, again, thank you to Breakthrough. Thank you, Ani, very much for dynamically leading this discussion. Thank you for the discussants. But I think to me, well, first of all, we should really emphasize there are so many more comments and questions in the chat that Madeline, the next few weeks, please respond to them all on the side. But I think your last comment, Madeline, is one that I would go back to. We are all trying to learn to do some new things here. Sure, it's new in the technology, but so are things, as was said, community benefits plans themselves have not exactly been a feature of a lot of government grant making, for example, but also DOE, with the very structure of the program, is stepping out in some new ways. Some have been discussed today and some haven't. So I think the real message here is, especially given the fact that we need to address the social equity issues that have been a focus of this discussion. We discuss them because it's the right thing to do and move that forward. But as was also said, we also need to discuss them because, frankly, without it, we will just have earned continuing headwinds to accomplishing also what we want in the clean energy transition. And we need them both. We need our community strong, and we need our clean energy transition to go at a pace and scale that is not for the faint of heart. And how we do that with communities not only taking along for the ride, but leading the ride, I think is what we need to focus on. So again, I think it's been a terrific discussion. Thanks to Madeline and the team for all the work that underpinned it. But this discussion just tells us we're at the beginning of this road, and we need to keep working together to get there on both scores. So with that, I think I do get to actually gavel this to a close, thanking all of you again for your contributions, and to all of you who have tuned in, and especially those who have sent in these comments and questions that certainly need further discussion. So thank you all, and we may be, I don't know, a few minutes over, but pretty good for government work, right, Susie? Right. Okay, thank you all.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.